Hey everybody, this is criminal defense attorney Andy Marcantel, and today I got 6 self-defense videos in the chamber ready to analyze. Welcome to Quick Draw Law. All right, our first video comes to us from Pueblo County, Colorado. Let's check it out. All right, so big guy and little guy. Big guy clearly the aggressor here. We're about to get a much better angle of the confrontation that ends in a shooting where big guy loses his life. Now you'll see here we got little guy leaning against his vehicle. A lot of posturing, a lot of smack talk, right in his face, clearly presenting an imminent threat. Now, big guy shoves him very hard into the vehicle. He hits his head on the vehicle and goes into the passenger seat. Big guy, you could see from the previous video, actually reached into the vehicle to try to grab little guy. And that's when the little guy takes the shot. I believe he takes 6 shots, mostly from a seated position, and big guy dies. So, first thing to keep in mind here is proportionality, and you hear us talk about this all the time in self-defense cases. When you're the defender in a situation like this, you got to be sure that you're using proportionate amount of force to what you're facing. So some people might watch this video and say, yeah, big guy is aggressive and he's in his face and he's yelling at him, and yeah, he even is a primary physical aggressor by shoving little guy into the car. But little guy didn't need to pull out that gun and fire at him because he was just basically bringing a gun to a fist fight, and so therefore it's automatically disproportionate force. That is not the correct answer in this particular analysis, because remember, there's no law out there on the books that says you can't bring a gun to a fist fight. It just says you have to make sure that the force that you use in self-defense is proportional. So here we have a much, much bigger guy pushing a much smaller guy. The smaller guy appears to hit his head on the back of the vehicle when he falls back, and then we have the big guy go after him and actually reach into his occupied vehicle to try to attack him. So given the disparity of size here, given the pure aggression, this little guy could very, very reasonably argue that he was facing an imminent deadly physical force at the time. And my understanding is a prosecutor took a look at this case and ultimately made what I think is the right decision and say this was a valid exercise of self-defense by the little guy. No charges were ultimately brought against him. This is tragic. This is posturing. This is certainly an unfortunate event that happened, and it's unfortunate that somebody died as a result. But when you are attacking somebody and shoving them who's half your size and reaching into their occupied vehicle to try to pull them out, you're taking serious risks, and this guy paid the price for that. So, unfortunate situation. It sucks that it turned out like this, but I think this is a legally justified shoot. One more thing kind of at play here. Colorado has a stand your ground law. They actually call it the Make My Day law. However, the stand your ground law does not apply to occupied vehicles. It only applies to an occupied residence or structure, your actual home. And that's kind of an anomaly here as far as these statutes go nationwide. Most of these states that have stand your ground laws will actually extend the same protections to an occupied vehicle that they do to your home. They don't in Colorado. Didn't end up mattering in this case. It was clearly an imminent threat of deadly physical force. This is a good shoot all day long. All right, our next video today comes from North Carolina. It's a really tragic video that involves what happens when somebody attempts to act as a good Samaritan and it goes horribly wrong. Let's check it out. So the guy in the white truck right now is actually a carjacker. He stole somebody else's vehicle, and the attempt at being a good Samaritan there is done by the guy in the yellow jacket. And you heard him fire off several rounds there, which we're going to discuss. But this turns horribly tragic when the carjacker comes back and at full speed runs him over, killing him on the scene. You'll see the driver kind of whips around, crashes a little bit, leaves the scene. But my understanding is, thankfully, the police did catch the bad guy down the road, but not before he did this tragic tragic killing of this would-be Good Samaritan. So just as a general rule here, when you're acting as a Good Samaritan, you're always putting yourself in harm's way. You've seen on this channel, we've done tons of video analyses of people trying to act as a Good Samaritan, and that involves taking a huge amount of risks. That's why it's heroic to do something like this. Unfortunately, however, I think this particular would-be Good Samaritan actually did a few things pretty wrong here. The most glaring of all is you saw him firing multiple rounds into the white truck. Now, the baseline rule here is that you may never use deadly physical force only to protect mere property. And every state is going to consider that car mere property. So you see him discharging rounds in order to try to get the guy out of the vehicle. And it doesn't look like he's actually trying to hit the carjacker, right? He's just a few feet away from him. He seems to be just kind of discharging rounds in or around the vehicle to send a message like, hey, you got to get out. I'm serious about this. Well, that is an improper use of deadly physical force at that time because the vehicle wasn't being driven in a way that it was actually posing an imminent danger to anybody of deadly physical force. If the vehicle had been coming at him at the time when he discharged the round, that changes the analysis entirely. But rather, he was just trying to extract the car hijacker from the vehicle. Now, he could have used whatever ordinary physical force he wanted. The law would have allowed him to open the door and rip the guy out by force and punch him in the face and throw him on the ground in order to remove him from that. But it doesn't allow him to use deadly physical force at that time. A scary thought here is that if this guy would have survived or if the carjacker wouldn't have come back and run him over tragically and killed him, would a prosecutor actually consider charging this Good Samaritan? Well, maybe. They might actually turn around and prosecute the guy who was discharging the rounds into the white truck. One extra thing to touch on here, if it's even crossed your mind that because this Good Samaritan used inappropriate amounts of force, does the guy in the white truck then, in self-defense, get to drive the truck into him? The answer, absolutely not. It's very clear at that point that the truck had backed up, the confrontation was over at that time, the truck could have left, but instead of that, the truck drives straight at him and kills him. And even if there were some sort of an argument for self-defense, there's an important concept here under every self-defense statute in the country that if you're the bad guy, if you're the initial wrongdoer, if you're the aggressor that put yourself in that situation, you forfeit all right to self-defense. So no argument that the guy in the white truck acted in self-defense. That was just a cold-blooded homicide. I'm glad that the police caught the bad guy so that justice can be done, but there's some important lessons to learn here. Now, important overarching concept here, guys. Whenever you are acting as a Good Samaritan and defending a third party, you are only allowed to use as much force as that person would have legally been able to use in that situation. So once again, given that this is mere property that we're dealing with, you're only going to be able to use ordinary physical force when helping that person out, because that's the legal amount that that person, the actual owner of the truck, would have been able to use. You aren't allowed to pull out your firearm and just start shooting into the vehicle because the party whose car was stolen here wouldn't have been able to use that much force. So really, really important concepts to keep in mind. It's good. We should be encouraging people to act as Good Samaritans and help their fellow man. However, you just got to be mindful of the laws in your particular jurisdiction. Next, we're heading over to Jackson, Mississippi for a crazy shooting video from a gas station. Let's check it out.
Surveillance video from inside.
All right, so here comes the bad guy. And then the shooting occurs outside, and it involves two different shooters. All right, so here we are inside the gas station. Watch the bad guy walk up here and just starts attacking this woman, punching her, pushing her, hitting her. Now, my first question here is, what the hell are these bystanders doing? I mean, where's the empathy? They're just watching this woman get hit, and they can't be bothered to help or intervene. Now, it's true, there is no legal obligation to act as a Good Samaritan, but in my opinion, this is pretty heartless.
He walks out the front door where he
The bad guy now goes outside. There's a guy sitting in his driver's seat, and he goes in and starts attacking him.
People inside the store reacted to hearing shots outside. A gunman in a hoodie.
Here's the second gunman.
After realizing he's been struck
As an automatic, takes a couple shots and gets in his car, drives away. The guy in the blue, who was the bad guy inside, dies as a result of the shooting. Amen, brother. All right, so once again, walking through this, I'm pretty upset at the people inside of the gas station. If they had intervened and kind of corrected this guy's ridiculous conduct, attacking this woman at that point, which is just the use of ordinary physical force, it's possible that they could have stopped the situation from happening outside. But instead of that, bad guy walks outside. He's still emboldened at this point. Maybe he's on drugs. Maybe he's got mental health problems. But for whatever reason, he feels like he's just entitled to attack everybody there. So he walks up to that car. Car door is open, and there's somebody sitting in the driver's seat, and he goes in and starts attacking the person in the driver's seat. Now, remember a couple of videos back where we were talking about states that have stand your ground laws that actually apply that standard to an occupied vehicle? Well, Mississippi is one of those states. And so, according to Mississippi law, as soon as this guy started attacking the dude in his own driver's seat, he is presumed under the law to be presenting a threat of deadly physical force. What does that mean for the driver who's being attacked in his occupied vehicle? That means he can shoot him. Now, my issue with the first gunman takes place when the guy in the blue, after now having been shot by the seated driver, seems to start retreating. And then at that point, the driver gets out of the car and starts shooting the guy who's fleeing. Now I got a problem with the shoot. At this point, when he's discharging rounds at the guy who's in retreat, it starts to look like a very legally problematic shoot to me. Then we have shooter number 2, the guy with the automatic. You see him kind of slunk around the front of the car, and he also appears to take out the firearm and just start shooting at the guy who appears at that point to be in a full retreat. In the very least, he's been neutralized by the first shooter, so that second shooter is going to have a very difficult time arguing that those shots were in self-defense. Bottom line is, both of these guys are going to have a crafty criminal defense attorney who can claim reasonably that the guy in the blue shirt was posing an imminent threat of deadly physical force to them at all times. And that's going to be tough to do here. I didn't see any guns. There might have been a verbal threat that wasn't picked up on these surveillance cameras that are available to the public. But I'd be very interested to see how the criminal defense attorneys there are going to handle it. But once again, shooter number 1 appears initially to be a good shoot, but then shoots inappropriately after that. And shooter 2 looks like he's just way off base, doesn't look like self-defense at all. And also, people should act as good Samaritans when they have a chance. When there's a woman being beat up in their presence, they should at least attempt to intervene, though there's no legal obligation to do so. But tisk tisk to those people. All right, next we're heading to the great state of Texas for the stupidest video of the day. Let's check it out. All right, we got a verbal altercation at a pool, and the guy in the blue shorts and sunglasses just revealed that he had a firearm in response to these verbal confrontations happening here. And he's now concealing it in the bag, obviously keeping his hand on the gun. These two guys are still jaw-jacking. That don't scare me, bro. It's talking smack. Not smart. You want to see really not smart? Sets the gun down in the grabbing reach of the people he just threatened, who do the predictable thing and grab the bag. Now we have a struggle in the pool. The two guys in the white hats punching him, trying to get that bag away, trying to disarm him. He's not letting go, and they are using whatever physical means they can in that pool to try to get him to release that bag containing the gun. And here comes this woman over here saying, break it up. And the video stops. Okay, wow. This is a great example of how not to act on both sides of the equation. But let's go slow. So first and foremost, we don't know the complete story here. The video starts when the verbal altercation has already been going on, about a second before the guy in the shades reveals the gun and places it back in the backpack. Remember what we were talking about earlier, okay? Just because he's displaying a gun in response to a verbal altercation and these threats by the two bigger guys does not automatically make him legally in the wrong. Remember, we talked about proportionality. He's outnumbered. These guys look bigger than him. So there could be an argument, at least at that point, that this was a valid display of a firearm. But then it gets worse. The guy doesn't go away, doesn't leave, so it doesn't look like he's doing it in self-defense. He's standing there still taunting these guys, and they're taunting him back. They're saying things to provoke him. That doesn't scare me. Whether or not it scares you or not doesn't mean it's a smart thing to say in this particular situation. You are not tactically behaving in a smart manner by continuing to argue with this guy who is armed and has just displayed it to you, indicating that he might be willing to use it. He might be unstable, he might be stupid, he might be drunk. It's hard to say, but this is a stupid, stupid way to react to this situation. But what's even stupider is the guy with the gun then sets the bag down containing the firearm he just showed them, takes his hand off of it, and puts it directly within the grabbing range of the two people he just threatened with it. They grab it, he jumps into the pool, and now they're struggling. My thoughts the whole time while they were struggling in that pool is everybody's really lucky that gun didn't go off in the pool. It's still very much possible to injure somebody with a firearm even if the bullet is fired underwater. And this could have easily caused a serious injury, maybe even death to somebody if that gun had accidentally gone off. And it would have been very, very much at that point on the guy with the shades, the guy who originally produced the gun. He almost certainly would have been held liable for that. And the reason is this, because once he has threatened those two guys with the firearm, they are absolutely allowed to disarm him at that point. If he's coming at them with the gun and he's shown it and he's threatening to use it in response to this verbal altercation, they are 100% in their legal right to try to take that firearm away from him and use any means necessary to do so. So when you see them walloping him in the head while he's still holding on to it, absolutely legally in the right to do that. Now, important to note, once they disarm him, once they take the gun away from him, the attack needs to cease unless they see another gun produced or another reason to think that there's a new deadly, imminent, dangerous force that he's presenting to them. And the right move here is then call the cops, say the guy just threatened us with the gun. We have the gun. We'll turn it over to the police when they arrive. They certainly aren't legally required to hand the guy who just threatened them with the gun back the same gun that he just threatened them with. They can hold on to it until law enforcement arrives. So I just think that this is really stupid on both sides. There were plenty of chances here to check your pride at the door. This could have easily been a worse situation for both sides. This is the type of situation, these arguments at pools, oftentimes involving pride and crap talking and maybe alcohol or drugs, where people end up losing their lives. I see that on a constant basis. So we're very lucky nothing like that happened. Learn from both sides here on what not to do in these types of situations. And I think that certainly the guy with the shades who produced the gun in a threatening manner was very likely in the wrong here. And I certainly legally support the right of the two guys in the white hats to disarm him once he had threatened them. So I think if anybody's charged here, it's going to be the guy in the shades. Interestingly, the video actually ends, stops rolling before they're able to successfully disarm him and take the gun. So I would have liked to have seen a few seconds after they disarmed him to see if they continued the assault, because that could be legally problematic, but we don't know from this video. All right, next we got a video from Sacramento, California involving an accidental shooting by an officer. So just to set up this video a little bit, what you're about to see, we got some cops on a routine patrol when they drive past a blue truck, and they make eye contact with the driver of the truck. They don't think much of it until they notice the driver of the truck immediately pulls over, and they see him go running away from his truck. So the officer's like, that's kind of suspicious. Let's go check it out. So the cops turn around, they go and they park, and they start investigating. Let's see what happens. So here they come up to the truck that's now been abandoned, and they're looking in it. Now, it's important to keep in mind, officers are allowed to do this. This is what we call maybe a plain view search. They're looking for contraband. They want to see if they can see any drugs, any sort of contraband. They also want to be aware if there are any firearms or weapons in the vehicle. So if they do end up confronting the suspect, they want to know if he can quickly arm himself. So they're just getting as much information as their plain view search of the vehicle allows them. Also important at this point, it's not a crime to run away from the cops at this point. It's not like he was commanded or given some sort of a lawful command not to run. So there's not enough to arrest, but there's enough for the cop to investigate. Now here we have kind of what looks like a row of RVs and cars in like a little shanty town. And the cop's asking the residents, hey, that guy who just literally ran by you, where'd he go? And their response is, huh? What guy? I didn't see no guy. He's like, really? He walked right past you, dude. Nah, didn't see him. Cops not getting much help here. Something tells me these people don't really want to help the cops very much. Cops just kind of trying to get anybody to talk to him. Unsuccessfully. So now they're trying to figure out what to do. Now they talked to this guy. Remember, this guy has said that he did not see the guy run by him. All right, he gets consent to peek his head in here. He looks in with consent. The guy waived his Fourth Amendment right to tell the cop no and said, yeah, man, go ahead, peek your head in there. So he's looking in there. And bottom line is, he doesn't find the guy in there, can't clearly see him. Says he's good, starts walking away. And here's the twist. He and his partner are walking along and they notice, oh, there's a guy laying down on top of the RV. Now, before we go to the next part of the video, let's intervene right here. So let's talk about what the officers know at this point. The officers know that they saw somebody make eye contact with them, park the vehicle, abandon it, and run away. Okay, once again, not illegal, but enough for suspicion for them to start looking into it. Second of all, they ran the plates of the vehicle while they were looking around doing their plain view search. And while they didn't see any contraband through the windows, they did run the vehicle plate and they found out that the registration is expired on it. So in the very least at this point, they have a civil traffic violation of driving a vehicle without proper registration. Once again, not enough for any sort of probable cause of a crime, but that's what they got. But this part's interesting. The man who owns the RV had told the cops, I never saw him. I have no idea who you're talking about. I never saw the guy run by or anything like that. So in other words, when the cops spy him on top of the RV, they know at that point that he is trespassing on top of the RV. He is illegally hiding on somebody else's property. Now we have a crime. Now we have enough for an arrest, and the officers take out their firearms at this point for a confrontation. Inform him he's at gunpoint. Come on down. He gets up. He starts rifling with his pockets in his pants. That's enough to make any officer nervous. And here he goes. Makes a break for it. Jumps. And pow! The gun goes off, striking the guy in the side of the head, luckily grazing him. You're going to see some blood, but luckily did not seriously injure him. The cop's gun went off and grazed the guy's head. He was arrested for felony flight from the officer. And my understanding is they searched his vehicle afterward, which you get to do. Incident to arrest. There's rules for vehicles allowing those cops to get a search, which they did. And they found narcotics, and he was later charged. Now, it's tough to tell what was happening in that video, so just a quick recap of what happened there. They pointed the firearm at him. They said, all right, man, time to surrender. Come on down. He gets up. He starts rifling around with his pants. That would make any officer nervous. You're worried he might be pulling out a firearm at that point. The officers luckily show some restraint and do not shoot him at that point, but that is not the safest thing he could have been doing when there's two officers with guns pointed at him, rifling around in his pockets and pulling around his pants and everything like that. Then he attempts to make his death-defying escape by leaping off of the RV, and the officer charges to tackle him. Now, the officer obviously had the firearm in his hand. The law at this point does not require the officer, in order to ensure that the tackle is more safe, to throw or discard or drop the gun. That would obviously be incredibly unsafe for any officer to do. He's legally allowed, in that heat of the moment, in that heat of that chase, to keep the firearm in his hand while he's making the tackle. tackle. The gun then goes off during that tackle, and luckily it's not worse than it is. It simply grazes his head. It could have certainly been worse. But the question here is, did the officer do anything wrong here? The officer could have killed this guy when he tackled him and when that round was discharged. So is there going to be any sort of charges against the officer or anything like that? And the answer is no. This was reasonable conduct by the officer. He was allowed to have the gun. He was allowed to confront the guy. He was allowed to issue a lawful command. And when he decided he was going to flee, he had the right to tackle him and didn't have an obligation under the law to voluntarily disarm himself. So this looks like a simple, honest mistake by the officer, and probably the officer's going to be able to argue that this guy resisted or hit him in some way that caused it to go off. I'm not convinced in any way, shape, or form that the officer purposefully, intentionally grazed the side of the guy's head or anything like that. This looks more in the avenue of honest mistakes that the officer made. I don't think the officer acted improperly in any way, shape, or form. There's always the age-old question, why didn't the officer go for non-lethal at that point? When the guy jumped off, maybe he could pull out a taser and do that. Well, these are heat-of-the-moment decisions that the officer has to make. He has a second to react, as you can see from the real time in the video. Probably not enough time to holster one weapon and then unholster another weapon and then deploy it in time. He had to make a split-second decision, and I don't think any prosecutor is going to take umbrage with it. It's unfortunate that the round was discharged here. It's very, very lucky for the suspect that he didn't die in this. And ultimately, as I mentioned, he was later prosecuted for things that were found in his car. That is, of course, completely irrelevant to the analysis that I just gave regarding what happened during the actual arrest. All right, our sixth and final video is a fun one. And it's technically a shooting video, though not shooting with a firearm. Let's watch the gasoline incident. All right, here's this guy pumping gas. Here comes a very suspicious-looking unmarked van. 3 people run out, and here we go. That is resourceful right there. It'll be tough to get that out of the upholstery. Well played, good sir. Now, first and foremost, this happened in the country of Chile, so American self-defense law doesn't apply here. But if it did happen here in the United States, this would be a completely appropriate use of ordinary physical force. Now, in the very least, this guy was facing ordinary physical force, right? There were 3 people that jumped out of this van. And if you even take a look at the guy who runs around the front of the car, in his hand, it looks like he might be carrying some kind of a weapon, maybe a knife, maybe something like that. And so there's a really, really good argument that this guy was actually facing imminent deadly physical force. And if he was armed with a firearm at that point, very arguably he would have been able to discharge a round in self-defense. But being resourceful, he decided to use the gasoline that was already pumping in his hand. It successfully repelled this attack. Good on this guy. And that's it, guys. Thanks for tuning in to Quick Draw Law today. Go and check out attorneysonretainer.us to learn all about our self-defense program and what it can do for you. Also, go check out attorneysforfreedom.com to learn all about our law firm and how we defend our clients in the justice system. As always, if you liked the video, make sure to leave us a like, a comment down below, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Until next time, this has been Attorney Andy Marcantel signing out. Peace.